We went straight to the experts and asked what are the top common mistakes recruiters should steer clear of. Here's what they have to warn you about.
I think, especially when you're first starting out, it's really overwhelming when you start sourcing for the first time. I'll use an example. The first job order I ever worked on was an accounting manager. The first thing I did, and recruiters that are listening that are in finance and accounting will appreciate this, is I reached out to every controller in my market. Because in my head, not understanding the industry yet, what I was telling myself was, well, controller, I know that's a management level accountant, must be appropriate for this job. But ultimately what ended up happening is I wasted a ton of time. I ticked off a lot of potential candidates by, reaching out to them about a job they weren't even remotely interested in. It wasn't even close to the salary range. But it was just me being naive. And that's going to happen naturally, especially when you're first starting out as a recruiter. So, one of the ways to avoid that is just really find a good mentor and ask them to double check your that's ultimately what helped me is when I first started sourcing and going through lists, and it can be overwhelming, especially when you're kind of jumping from job to job. I would find somebody in my organization who knew a lot about that vertical and just say, hey, can you just give this a once over? And not dive into every single candidate on that level, but an experienced recruiter can look at one of your lists and say, yeah, you're on the right track or you're way off the mark, and prevent a lot of headaches for you down the line.
So, some of the mistakes that we make are not clarifying the role with the hiring manager, really understanding what it is they're looking for, and wasting some time filtering through candidates and sending those off to the hiring manager that you might not necessarily should have sent. So making sure you understand all aspects of the role and essential experience requirements. The rest, like I said, if you're willing to learn, great, learn those, but really define the difference between those two. What's necessary? What are you really looking for? And then defining each step of the hiring process. So, setting the expectations, making sure the whole process isn't too lengthy. Because your candidate will lose interest. That's just how it is these days. They'll get another offer in the meantime, So, some of the mistakes are just not setting up all the expectations with the hiring manager and the candidates right at the very beginning.
Yeah, I'm the diversity, equity, and inclusion lead for my organization. And I would say, and this just goes for a general purpose, that I think recruiters tend to have bias immediately from a resume, right? I don't care whether it's the school you went to, your name, where you lived, all of those things. Immediately, we do it no matter if we don't even know we're doing it, right? And I think that's the biggest fault we make. And we're always going to make it because there's always going to be bias. But I think that we have to be really clear and understand that it's there and try to work around it. And I think the way to do that is really learning about that subject, about bias. I think recruiters should be the first ones to be doing that research on that. And not just for diversity purposes, for any purpose, right? Just learning how to read a resume without, being judgmental to it. So I think it's huge.
So I think back to when I first started, and I remember almost being subservient in the way that I worked. And because the person I was speaking to had a lot of years experience in their industry sector, especially when it was in the IT sector, I would take a lot of what they say on face value. I wouldn't really question any of it because they knew their job better than me. So I think when you first start out, you presume a lot. And you should never presume in this job, because you should always try and learn a bit more as possible. So, when you first start, if someone gives you an answer, for example, when you ask if you can commute to a certain area, and they're like, yeah, I can commute. Never presume that that's just the right answer. If someone lives in an area where they have to drive to the station and then get the train from there and then get a bus from where they get off on the other end, then that actually is quite a long commute. And if you don't delve into that in deeper and try to understand those points, then that could hinder your ability to place that person at the final hurdle. So, it's about, when you speak to people, probe where you get the opportunity to probe, almost be like, I call it a detective or an investigator, put that different hat on, because every answer you get, if you feel that there's more clarity that's needed, ask that question. Otherwise, you'll never know.
Absolutely. I was thinking about this question and I'm like, oh gosh, we make all the mistakes all the time. But I think the biggest one is making assumptions. And whether it's making assumptions on their resume, making assumptions about, their names, D&I has become such a big thing. And so overlooking candidates from the very beginning for certain things is huge. Those assumptions get you every time. I actually had a hiring manager a long time ago that had rejected a candidate because they made a specific assumption that with just clarification could have been totally avoided, and they lost a really good candidate because of it. And so I think that's one of the bigger things is if you have a question, ask it. Don't make the assumptions. I think that's a really big mistake. And then also follow up. And follow up at the end of the interview, after the interview is so important. I know a lot of times recruiters tend to be like, they didn't send me a thank you email. And it's like, but you do send them a thank you email either. So that end of communication is so important. Not keeping that rolling is gonna be important. Communication is so key.
I've been there. Like, I went freelance recruiting and I knew not as much about the role as I should have done. So my past life, I was an area manager for Aldi, and I left, set up my own recruitment agency and started recruiting directly from them. So the amount of mistakes I've made in the early days are insane. And like early on, there was this over-reliance on CVs and using them to assess candidates, and this bias that could creep in by looking at similar companies and thinking, oh, candidates must be good. It is one of the most simple kind of biases that you see, especially in tech. You have people who look at Facebook or Meta or Google and think, oh, they must be good, let's put them through, and deselecting other candidates as well. So don't have this over-reliance on the CV or really overrate past employers. Some of them will be good, trust me, but what you can do is speak to more candidates than you think as well. So if you're using cover letters, if you are using those anonymous application questions as well, they're fantastic, because people who don't always look great on paper, whenever you interview and get speaking to them and asking those probing questions that we chatted about, they'll be perfect fits for the role as well. And a lot of the UK providers and people who are in the HR tech scene are talking about the CV dying out at some point, which will be interesting if it does, because there's been some incredible research that shows that people can look at names and will deselect based on people's names, or they'll have to apply for more jobs as well. So yeah, some frightening research in the over-reliance on CVs and all the dangers that can come from it. So yeah, you got to be open-minded early on in your career.
Some people try to get a little bit too diverse in their sourcing methods. I understand the mindset to try to cast like a really wide net, but find the sweet spot. As I mentioned before, LinkedIn was it for me, and anything else I tried paled by comparison. And since everybody else is on LinkedIn, everybody's on LinkedIn, and that just made sense to me. Another mistake that people can make is to, and this is going to be, so my company is national. We span all the time zones, and I'm on the East Coast. So, if I just work 9 to 5 here, I'm basically working pre-morning hours up till 2 o'clock for people on the West Coast. Well, I'm going to miss out on a lot of opportunities then. Okay. And so what I do is myself, and some people, to be fair, they have families and they can't do this. But if you're young and you're new and you don't have, those family commitments, and you have the ability to do what I'm going to tell you, I would highly recommend this. I like to start, here's my work day, just to tell you how I account for this. I start ridiculously early in the morning. I'm in the office by 6:30 in the morning, and I'm sourcing for about 2.5 hours straight until 9 o'clock. But then I'm done for at least 2 hours. I work out, I eat, I do anything but, recruiting. And then after that, I go and I jump right back into work, like around 11, and I work for about 3.5 hours, 4 hours. I would say like around 3 or 4 o'clock is when I stop. And then I take a couple hours to do some personal stuff. And then at night, it's just very, relaxed. I'm watching hockey on TV or something, and I'll respond to some emails, things like that. But there are some people that, are still trying to communicate with me at 7 or 8 o'clock at night. Now, I don't always accommodate that, but most of the time I do. But not away in a desk somewhere, typing away at a desk. I'm not doing that. And nowadays, I've got Outlook on my phone. So while I'm watching TV, I'm watching Monday Night Football, and somebody gets back to me about an appointment, wants to confirm, I can just right on my phone, right there, do that. So don't be afraid to transcend the normal 9-to-5 paradigm is what I'm saying, and while still keeping a work-life balance, because it's possible.
I mean, we're human, we're gonna make mistakes, right? I think it starts with a really solid, detailed intake where you have your intake written out. It's kind of a standard platform, but you get deep. I don't like resume slingers, so listening to your hiring managers and having the conversation. If they want the Lamborghini for a Ford price, have that conversation up front and say, I'll go look for it, but we might have to bend here. But really, skill set wise, what are they truly looking for? And continue to go down. If it's a super technical role and you don't know what those technologies are, Google is your friend. Utilize it so you know what you're talking about. In those intakes, I think it's really important to ask hiring managers to have them give you 2 or 3 knockout questions. Like, what are just to help them vet, right? And those might be those technical questions that you really wouldn't know what the answers are, but they can give you the question, they can give you the answer, something similar to that they're looking for to help you go even a level deeper on your own phone interviews. And so regular that along with maintaining regular communication with your hiring managers is key. So the first couple candidates, maybe throw the resume over and say, am I on the right track? Yes. Okay. After a couple interviews, being able to touch base regularly, I think is key.